The memorial wall stretched 30 meters across the reconstructed plaza of Catherine Prime, polished obsidian, reflecting the twin suns like a mirror of grief. 8,400 names were carved into the stone. Catherine names, each one representing a life cut short by violence, by hatred, by the simple mathematics of invasion and occupation. At the very bottom, separate from the others, a single human name stood alone. Commander Brennan Cross, Terran Defense Initiative. Died protecting those he never met. Elena Vosch stood before that name, her hand pressed against the warm stone. She was 43 now, her dark hair touched with silver at the temples, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. Lines carved by grief and gratitude in equal measure. Behind her, the restored city hummed with afternoon activity. Children played in parks that had been rubble. Market vendors called out prices for vegetables grown in soil that had been soaked with blood. Life continuing as it always did in defiance of those who would end it. But Elena wasn't thinking about the present. Her mind was 72 hours in the past, reliving the moment when everything changed. The moment when her desperate gamble had summoned not rescuers, but something far more terrifying. An armada. She closed her eyes and the memory pulled her back. 72 hours earlier, the sky above Catherine Prime had burned. Elena stood on the command deck of Orbital Defense Station Meridian, watching her world die in real time. The holographic display painted the tactical situation in colors that made her stomach clench. Red dominated the screen. So much red. 4 of their 6 defense stations were gone, reduced to expanding clouds of debris that caught the light of the twin suns. The Vorthan fleet had arrived 3 days ago, with the efficiency of a scalpel and the mercy of a hammer. Their ships were dark, angular things that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. There were 47 of them, and they had turned Catherine orbital defenses into a shooting gallery. "Commander, we've lost contact with Station Harmony." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Dax Marin, young enough that his voice still cracked under stress. Energy spike detected at their location. They're gone." Elena said nothing. Words seemed inadequate to the weight of the moment. Station Harmony had housed 400 souls. 400 people who had trusted her to keep them safe. 400 more names for walls that hadn't been built yet. Casualties. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. Inside, she was screaming. "Unknown, Commander. Communications are fragmenting. Best estimates put civilian casualties planet-side at..." Marin's hands shook as he worked his console. 8,000 confirmed dead. Maybe twice that number missing, or trapped in the bombardment zones. 8,000. The number hung in the air like a physical thing, heavy and cold. Elena had known many of them, had served with their parents, had attended their children's naming ceremonies. Dr. Marcus Thorne's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Elena. Not Commander, just her name spoken with the weight of 3 decades of friendship. "We need to make a decision." Marcus stood at the science station, his silver hair disheveled, his normally calm face drawn with exhaustion and grief. He was 58, the head of Catherine's scientific council, and the closest thing Elena had to family besides Lyra. His son Damien had been on one of the evacuation transports that never made it off-world. Had been. Past tense was a weapon that kept cutting. "The council is requesting your presence for an emergency session," Marcus continued. "They want to discuss terms of surrender." Surrender, the word tasted like ash. Elena looked at the tactical display again. 2 defense stations remaining. The Vorthan fleet had established orbital supremacy and was methodically destroying any ship that tried to break through their blockade. 40% of the civilian population had made it to evacuation zones, but the transports couldn't launch. They were sitting targets packed with families, huddled together in the dark, waiting for someone to save them, waiting for Elena to save them. "How long until the Vorthans begin ground operations?" she asked. "Intelligence estimates 6 hours," replied Commander Vex Torin, her tactical officer. He was a veteran of the border conflicts 30 years ago, back when Catherine still had border conflicts to fight. "Maybe 10 if we're lucky. They're setting up processing centers in the occupied zones." Processing centers. Such a clinical term for concentration camps. Elena had seen the intelligence reports from other worlds the Vorthans had conquered. The images were the kind that lived behind your eyelids, waiting for you to close your eyes. Men separated from families. Children taken for education. Women sent to labor camps where they worked until they couldn't work anymore, and then simply ceased to exist in any official record. The Vorthans called it integration. Everyone else called it what it was. Genocide in slow motion. "Tell the council I'm on my way," Elena said. "And Marcus, come with me. I need your counsel." They took a shuttle down to the surface, weaving through debris fields that had been ships just hours ago. Through the viewport, Elena could see Catherine Prime spread out below like a jewel cracked and bleeding. Fires burned in 3 major cities. Smoke rose in columns that were visible from orbit. This was her world. These were her people, and she had failed them. The council chamber was chaos barely contained by protocol. 27 representatives shouted over each other, their voices rising and falling in waves of desperation and recrimination. Elena stood at the center podium and waited for the storm to break over her. Council leader Varys Kale struck the resonance chime 3 times before order reluctantly returned. He was 81, his face a map of wrinkles earned through a lifetime of diplomacy and compromise. Today he looked every one of those years. Commander Vosh, he said, his voice carrying, despite its frailty. The council has voted, 22-5. We must accept the Vorthon terms and surrender. The words landed like a physical blow. Elena felt Marcus tense beside her. The terms being, she asked, though she already knew. Complete disarmament, Vorthon military occupation, economic integration into their empire. Kale paused, and when he continued, his voice had dropped to barely a whisper. And labor conscription for all citizens between the ages of 15 and 60. Labor conscription, another clinical term for slavery. Elena looked around the chamber at faces she had known her entire life. She saw fear there, yes, but also something worse. Resignation. They had already decided to surrender their freedom because the alternative was to watch their children die. And maybe they were right. Maybe survival at any cost was better than principled extinction. But Elena couldn't accept that, not yet. Counselors, she said, I propose an alternative. There is no alternative, snapped Counselor Bren Marcus. He had lost his entire family in the first day of bombardment. We cannot fight them. We are scientists, explorers, teachers, not warriors. We never have been. Then perhaps, Elena said quietly, it's time we called someone who is. The chamber fell silent. The ancient beacon, Marcus said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Elena, no, we don't even know if it works. It's 200 years old. What beacon? Kale demanded. Elena turned to face the full council. 200 years ago, when Catherine first reached the stars, our founders installed an emergency distress system, a beacon designed to send faster-than-light transmissions to any advanced civilizations within range. It was meant as a safeguard, a last resort if we ever faced complete destruction. And you want to activate it now. Counselor Saravex's voice dripped skepticism. Commander, we don't know who would receive such a message. We could be inviting something worse than the Vorthons. Worse than slavery. Elena's voice cut through the chamber. Worse than watching our children taken. Worse than our entire civilization erased from existence. No one answered. I'm not asking for permission, Elena continued. I'm informing you of my decision as defense commander. We will activate the beacon, and we will buy time for a response by any means necessary. That's madness, Bren said. You'll get us all killed. Elena met his eyes. Counselor, we're already dying. I'm offering us a chance to die hoping. The vote was closer than she expected, 15-12 in favor of activating the beacon with 3 abstentions. Democracy functioning even at the end of the world. Small comfort. Marcus accompanied her to the old archives beneath the Capitol building. The beacon sat in a chamber that hadn't been opened in decades, covered in dust and the weight of forgotten purpose. It looked like a monument more than a machine, all curves and crystal matrices that hummed faintly when Marcus activated the power systems. It's still functional, he said, surprise evident in his voice. The power cells are degraded but sufficient for 1 transmission. Maybe 2, if we're lucky. Elena stepped up to the control interface. The symbols were ancient Catherine script, predating modern standardization. She could barely read them. Who will receive this? Marcus asked. The system picks recipients randomly based on distance and estimated technological advancement. It could be anyone. Or no one, Elena said, but I have to try mine. She thought of Lyra, her daughter, currently hiding in an evacuation shelter with 30,000 other terrified civilians. 8 years old, still young enough to believe her mother could fix anything. Elena had to at least try to be worthy of that faith. Marcus, she said quietly, if this doesn't work, if no one comes, I want you to promise me something. Elena, promise me you'll get Lyra out. Find a way through the blockade. Steal a ship if you have to. Just get her somewhere safe. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then, I promise. But you're going to talk to the one who tells her stories about this someday. About the day you saved Catherine. Elena managed a smile, though it felt like breaking. Record the message. The beacon systems came online with a cascade of harmonics that made the air shimmer. Marcus worked the ancient controls with the careful precision of a man who understood that this was their last throw of the dice. Ready, he said. The transmission will reach 17 different star systems within the first hour. Recipients are being selected based on current galactic positioning and technological indicators. Elena, once we send this, there's no taking it back. I know. She stepped up to the transmission matrix. Record. A chime indicated activation. Elena took a breath and spoke words that would change everything. This is Catherine Prime of the Catherine Republic. Our world is under attack by the Vorthan Empire. Our defenses are failing. Our civilian population is in immediate danger of genocide. We are a peaceful people facing extinction. Any assistance would be gratefully accepted. Please, someone, anyone, help us. Her voice didn't crack until the last word. Help. Such a small word to carry such desperate weight. Marcus stopped the recording. For a moment, they stood in silence, listening to the beacon system's hum as it prepared to fling their prayer into the darkness between stars. Transmission sent, Marcus said finally. Now we wait. How long? For a response, hours at minimum, days more likely, if anyone responds at all. They emerged from the archives to find Catherine Prime's sky darkening with something worse than nightfall. The Vorthan fleet had moved into low orbit, their ships like black wounds against the blue atmosphere. Landing craft had begun their descent, thousands of them, carrying the soldiers who would implement the occupation. Elena's communicator chimed. It was Vex Torin from Station Meridian. Commander Vorthan ground forces are landing in 12 locations simultaneously. Estimates now put their deployment at 40,000 troops. They're not bothering with precision anymore, just overwhelming force. 40,000 soldiers against a population that had no army. Concentrate all remaining defense forces at around the evacuation zones, Elena ordered. We buy time. Every hour we hold, that is another hour for help to arrive. Commander, with respect, no help is coming. We're alone. Elena looked up at the sky at the black ships descending like judgment. Maybe, she said, but we fight anyway, until we can't fight anymore. Then we fight a little longer. The next 14 hours were a blur of desperate last stands and tactical retreats. Elena coordinated from Station Meridian, watching her people fight and die with weapons designed for police work, not war. They had no military tradition, no warrior culture, no experience with the kind of industrial violence the Vorthons brought. But they had courage. That counted for something. It counted for bodies in the street and names that would need to be carved into stone. By hour 8, the evacuation zones were surrounded. 47,000 civilians trapped waiting for transports that couldn't launch. The Vorthons were setting up their processing centers, methodical and efficient in their cruelty. By hour 10, Elena had to make the choice that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Sector 7 held 18,000 civilians. Sectors 1 through 6 held another 47,000. The Vorthons were moving to capture all 7 sectors simultaneously. Elena had enough forces to defend 6. Only 6. Commander Vex Torin said, his voice flat with the kind of calm that came after shock had burned through all other emotions. If we pull forces from Sector 7 to reinforce the others, we might hold until help arrives. If help arrives, Elena thought, if anyone received the beacon, if anyone cared enough to respond, if, do it, she said. The words came out steady, which was worse somehow. Pull all forces from Sector 7. Concentrate on the other 6 sectors. Commander, that's abandoning 18,000 people. I know what it is, Commander Torin. She gave the order. 2,400 people died in Sector 7 before the Vorthons finished securing it. 2,400 people she had deliberately chosen not to save. 2,400 names that would join the others on the memorial wall. Elena stood on the command deck of Station Meridian and watched it happen in real time through drone feeds. She didn't look away, didn't let herself close her eyes. If she had made the choice, she would witness the consequences. That was responsibility. That was command. That was hell. Marcus found her 3 hours later, standing motionless at the viewport, staring down at the world below. Elena, he said gently, we're receiving responses to the beacon. She turned, a hope warring with despair in her chest. How many of 17's transmissions were sent? 16 responses so far. Marcus's face was grave. 15 of them are refusals. Of course they were. The Altarian Confederacy expressed sympathy, but noted they had border conflicts of their own. The Nexus Trade Alliance regretted that Catherine Prime was not on any major commercial routes. The Crystal Singers of Vega 3 sent thoughts and prayers, which were worth exactly as much as they sounded. On and on. Polite refusals wrapped in diplomatic language that all meant the same thing: you're not important enough to save. The 16th response, Elena asked, though she barely had the strength to care anymore. Still transmitting. It's a strange one, very brief. Let me play it for you. Marcus activated the holographic display. Static cleared and a voice emerged. Human voice. Male deep with an accent Elena didn't recognize. Catherine Prime, this is Admiral Garrett Hawkins of the Terran Defense Initiative. We have received your distress call. Help is coming. Estimated arrival in 18 hours. Hold position and protect your civilians. Terran Defense Initiative, out. The message ended. Silence filled the command deck. Terran Defense Initiative, Elena repeated slowly. Marcus, what do we know about them? Marcus was already working his console, pulling up files from Catherine's stellar database. Searching in Terra, third planet from a yellow dwarf star. Species designation human. Recently spacefaring approximately 200 years since achieving faster-than-light capability. Military capacity. Database last updated 52 years ago. At that time, limited military presence. Small defensive fleet. Primarily exploratory vessels. Total estimated fleet size, 40 to 60 ships, mostly scout class. 18 hours, Elena did the math. If they were coming from anywhere within beacon range, they'd be traveling at maximum speed to make that timeline. Small exploratory fleet. Maybe they'd send 5 ships. Maybe 10 if they were feeling generous. It was better than nothing. It wasn't enough. Prepare a response, Elena said. Thank them for their assistance. Provide tactical data on Vorthon positions. And Marcus start calculating evacuation routes for when their ships arrive. Maybe we can use their presence as cover to get transports off-world. You think they're coming to evacuate, not fight. They're explorers, not warriors. What else could they do against a Vorthon battle fleet? What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the database was wrong. 52 years out of date, compiled before humanity had learned the lessons that would reshape them. Before Protocol Sentinel, before the transformation. She didn't know that she'd just called not rescuers, but something the galaxy had forgotten existed. The next 14 hours passed in a haze of desperate defense. The Vorthons weren't attacking anymore, just consolidating their positions. They'd won, and they knew it. Now came the occupation, the processing, the systematic destruction of everything Catherine culture had built. Elena coordinated from Station Meridian, catching sleep in 15-minute intervals, her mind spinning tactical problems that had no solutions. Her crew moved like ghosts, exhausted beyond words, functioning on discipline and the stubborn refusal to quit while their people still breathed. At hour 16, Marcus appeared at her station with news that made her blood freeze. Elena, we're detecting a second Vorthon fleet entering the system. The tactical display updated. 50 more ships, fresh and undamaged, dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge. They're not here for occupation, Vextorin said, his voice hollow. They're here to deal with the Terran response. Elena understood with sudden, terrible clarity. The Vorthons had intercepted the beacon. They knew help was coming, and they'd prepared an ambush. 50 fresh ships against maybe 5 or 10 Terran explorers. It would be a slaughter, Commander, Marcus said quietly. Maybe we should warn them. Tell them to turn back. Elena almost laughed. Almost. Turn back where, Marcus? They said help was coming. They're already committed. She thought about Lyra still hiding in the evacuation shelter, about the 47,000 civilians in sectors 1 through 6 waiting for rescue that would never arrive, about the 8,000 already dead and the 2,400 she'd deliberately abandoned. She thought about Admiral Garrett Hawkins, whoever he was, bringing his small fleet of explorers to try to save strangers walking into a trap he couldn't possibly survive. More names for walls that weren't big enough. At hour 17 and 43 minutes, Marcus's console erupted with alerts. Contact, he said, his voice rising. Multiple contacts at system's edge. They're here. Elena pulled up the sensor display, preparing herself to watch brave fools die. The screen showed 12 contacts initially. 12 ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Larger than she'd expected, but still hopelessly outnumbered. Then the sensors updated. 23 ships, 39, 56. The numbers kept climbing. Commander, Marcus said, his hands shaking as he worked the controls. The sensors are registering 89 contacts, no 97. Commander, they keep appearing. I don't understand. Elena watched the numbers climb. 104, 117, 128. Marcus checked the sensors. They must be malfunctioning. I've run diagnostics 3 times. They're functioning perfectly. Commander, we're now reading 137 distinct contacts. All of them military-grade warships. All of them heading directly for us. 137 warships. Elena stared at the display, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. This wasn't a rescue fleet. This wasn't even a battle group. This was something else entirely. This was an armada. The Terran ships moved in formations so precise it looked artificial. They arranged themselves in a combat spread that covered thousands of kilometers, positioning themselves between Catherine Prime and both Vorthon fleets with the casual efficiency of a species that had done this before, many times before. The lead ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest Vorthon battleship. Its hull was smooth, almost organic colored in shades of gray and blue that seemed to shift in the starlight. No decorations, no intimidating spikes or aggressive angles, just pure functional lethality. A transmission came through on all frequencies. The same voice from before, but this time without the crackle of distance. Clear, strong, absolutely certain. Vorthon forces, this is Admiral Garrett Hawkins of the Terran Defense Initiative. You have attacked a species that has invoked Protocol Sentinel. You have committed acts of genocide against a civilian population. You have exactly 30 seconds to begin withdrawing all forces from the system. Failure to comply will result in your removal. This is your only warning. The transmission ended. Silence filled the command deck. Then from the Vorthon flagship came a response. General Thane Vorak's voice was filled with contempt. Unknown species, you are interfering with a legitimate military operation authorized by the Vorthon Empire. This system and all its resources belong to us by right of conquest. You are outnumbered and outmatched. Withdraw immediately or face... Your 30 seconds started 5 seconds ago. Hawkins interrupted. Make your choice. Elena watched the tactical display, her mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. 137 human ships. The database had said 40 to 60, mostly scouts. What were these on the display? The Vorthon fleets began moving the ships that had been consolidating their positions around Catherine Prime, repositioning to face this new threat. Nearly 250 Vorthon warships, veteran crews with decades of conquest experience, against 137 ships from a species Catherine had dismissed as recently spacefaring explorers. The humans didn't move, didn't break formation, just waited with the patience of mountains. Commander Vex Torin said, his voice barely a whisper, "This isn't a rescue fleet, this is something else entirely." Elena couldn't answer because she was starting to understand, and the understanding was terrifying. The database wasn't wrong about humanity being recently spacefaring. It was wrong about what they'd been doing for the last 52 years. They hadn't been exploring. They'd been preparing. The timer hit 0. The Vorthons hadn't moved. Neither had the humans. Then Admiral Hawkins spoke one more time, and his voice carried the weight of judgment itself. Hostile action confirmed. All ships, you are weapons free. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. The Battle of Catherine Prime, the 47-minute war. The moment the galaxy remembered that humanity had never actually been peaceful. They'd just been waiting. The human fleet opened fire, and Elena Vosh learned what an armada truly meant. The first volley from the Terran fleet arrived in silence. Space combat had no sound, no dramatic explosions that roared and echoed. Just light and physics, cause and effect, played out across distances that made human comprehension meaningless. But what Elena Vosh witnessed from the command deck of Station Meridian defied every assumption she had ever made about the nature of warfare. The human ships didn't fire energy weapons. Not at first. Instead, they launched what looked like simple metal rods. Cylinders of tungsten and titanium, each one accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed by magnetic rails that ran the length of those massive ships. No warheads, no explosives, just mass and velocity married together in a union that made nuclear weapons look gentle by comparison. The mathematics were brutal in their simplicity. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. When velocity approached the speed of light, the numbers became biblical. Elena watched the tactical display as the first wave of projectiles crossed the distance between fleets in seconds. The Vorthon ships activated their shields' energy barriers designed to deflect or absorb incoming fire. They had defended against energy weapons for decades, against missiles and torpedoes, against every conventional threat in their arsenal of experience. They had never faced relativistic kill vehicles. The projectiles didn't explode on contact with the shields. They simply punched through. The energy barriers that could turn aside particle beams and deflect laser fire might as well have been tissue paper. The tungsten rods passed through the shields like they weren't there because, at those velocities, nothing short of a planetary magnetic field could alter their trajectory. 3 Vorthon cruisers ceased to exist in the first 8 seconds. Not destroyed, not disabled. They simply stopped being ships and became expanding clouds of superheated plasma and debris. The kinetic impacts released energy equivalent to tactical nuclear weapons. Hulls designed to withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons vaporized. Internal bulkheads meant to contain breaches became shrapnel that turned crew compartments into abattoirs. Mother of stars, Marcus breathed beside Elena. His hands had stopped working the console. He was simply staring, his analytical mind struggling to process the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Elena said nothing. Words seemed inadequate, small. She thought about the database entry about humanity being recently spacefaring, about limited military capacity. 52 years of bad data. 52 years of galaxy-wide assumption that these humans were young, inexperienced, perhaps naive in their exploration of the cosmos. The second volley launched, then the third. The human ships fired in sequence, a rolling barrage that never seemed to end. Each vessel carried hundreds of those terrible rods, and they delivered them with the precision of a surgeon and the mercy of an avalanche. The Vorthon fleet tried to respond. Energy weapons lanced out across the void, brilliant beams of concentrated particles that would have reduced Catherine's defense stations to slag in seconds. They struck the human ships and simply stopped. Not absorbed, not deflected. The beams hit some kind of barrier and ceased to exist, their energy deleted from reality as if it had never been. What kind of shields are those? Vextorin asked, his tactical displays painting a picture that made no sense. Energy weapons are passing through without any degradation, then just terminating at the hull perimeter. That's not possible. But it was happening. Elena leaned forward, studying the engagement with the desperate focus of someone trying to understand the rules of a game she hadn't known existed. The human shields weren't deflecting energy. They were doing something else. Something that looked like selective annihilation of specific wavelengths, as if the shields could reach out into the fundamental structure of reality and simply erase the things they didn't like. The Vorthon fleet broke formation. After 19 minutes of one-sided slaughter, with 23 of their ships reduced to expanding debris fields, they abandoned their coordinated attack pattern and scattered. It was the right tactical decision. Concentrated formations were target-rich environments. Dispersal meant the humans would have to divide their fire, would have to chase individual targets across vast distances. It didn't help. The human fleet split into smaller task forces without any apparent communication, each group peeling off to pursue clusters of fleeing Vorthon ships. They moved with the kind of coordination that spoke of either quantum-entangled communication systems or collective consciousness. Every ship seemed to know where every other ship would be, what targets they would engage, how the battle would flow. Elena watched one particular engagement magnified on her tactical display. A single human ship smaller than most of its companions, but sleek and angular in a way that suggested predatory purpose, pursued 3 Vorthon destroyers. The Vorthon ships were firing constantly, pouring everything they had at their pursuer. Particle beams, missiles, kinetic cannons, desperate barrages that lit up the tactical display like a festival of light. Nothing reached the human ship. Those impossible shields simply absorbed or deleted everything thrown at them. The human ship returned fire, not with the tungsten rods, but with something else. Beams that looked like twisted space, visible only because they bent the light of distant stars around them. Gravity weapons. Weaponized distortions in space-time itself that reached out and crushed the Vorthon destroyers like invisible hands closing around paper constructs. The enemy ships didn't explode. They crumpled, imploded, folded in on themselves as localized gravity fields intensified beyond anything matter could withstand. Hulls designed to handle the stresses of faster-than-light travel compressed into spheres of crushed metal and flesh small enough to hold in your hand. 3 ships. 3 distorted gravity pulses. 3 new debris clouds. 31 minutes into the battle, the second Vorthon fleet tried to retreat. The 50 ships that had arrived as reinforcements, that had been positioned to ambush any rescue attempt, began accelerating toward the system's edge. They would need hours to reach safe, faster-than-light jump distance, but they had time. The human fleet was engaged with the first Vorthon group, occupied with mopping up the original invasion force. Except the humans had apparently considered this possibility. 6 human ships broke away from the main engagement. Just 6. They accelerated on an intercept course with the fleeing Vorthon fleet, and they moved fast. Faster than anything Elena had seen before. The acceleration curves on her tactical display showed forces that should have turned any biological crew into paste against their bulkheads. Those ships are pulling over 300 gravities of acceleration, Marcus said, his voice flat with disbelief. Nothing living could survive those forces. Are they automated? I don't think so, Elena replied, watching the pursuit unfold. I think they have inertial compensation systems we can't even begin to understand. The 6 human ships overtook the fleeing Vorthan fleet in 18 minutes. Overtook and passed them, positioning themselves directly in the retreat path. Then they stopped. Just stopped, matching velocity with the Vorthon ships in a display of casual mastery over physics that made Elena's head hurt. Then they opened fire. Not with kinetic weapons or gravity distortions. This time they used something that looked like lightning, made solid arcing chains of energy that leaped from ship to ship, jumping through the Vorthan formation like electricity through a conductor. Except this electricity didn't follow the rules. It turned corners that shouldn't exist, passed through shields that should have blocked it, struck with precision that suggested intelligence behind each bolt. Ships died, power systems overloaded, reactors went critical. The Vorthan fleet, already demoralized by the slaughter of their companion force, broke completely. Individual ships scattered in every direction, abandoning formation, abandoning tactics, abandoning everything except the desperate animal need to escape. The humans let them go. Most of them. Approximately 70 ships fled into the dark, damaged and traumatized but alive. The humans could have pursued, could have hunted down every last vessel. But they didn't. 47 minutes after it began, the battle ended. The tactical display told the story in numbers that Elena would remember for the rest of her life. 180 Vorthan ships destroyed or disabled. 70 fled. Of the 137 human vessels that had arrived, 137 remained operational. 0 losses. 3 ships showed damage indicators marked in amber on the display. But even those were minor. Scorched hull plating, degraded shield emitters, nothing that threatened operational capacity. The only human casualty appeared on a subscreen that Elena almost missed. A small notification easy to overlook amid the cascade of tactical data. 1 fighter craft lost. 1 pilot killed in action. Squadron leader Brennan Cross. Out defending Catherine evacuation transport. 1 death. 1 name. 1 person who would never go home. Elena stared at that notification, that single casualty report, and something broke inside her. The humans had sent 137 warships across unknown space to save strangers. They had engaged a fleet more than twice their size and destroyed it with the efficiency of an industrial process. And they had lost 1 person. 1. Because that 1 person had chosen to shield a Catherine civilian transport, had put himself between children and death. A transmission came through on the command frequency. The same voice from before, Admiral Garrett Hawkins, but without the hard edge of combat. Softer now, tired. Catherine Prime, this is Admiral Hawkins. The immediate orbital threat has been neutralized. We're detecting Vorthan ground forces on your planet. Approximately 40,000 troops concentrated in occupied zones. Do you require assistance with ground operations? Elena tried to respond, found her throat closed, managed to force words through sheer will. Admiral Hawkins, this is Commander Elena Vosh, Catherine Defense Council. Yes, we need help. Ground forces are establishing processing centers. Civilians are trapped. We have no capacity to counter them. Understood, Commander. Marine landing operations will commence immediately. Please transmit coordinates for civilian concentration areas. We'll prioritize those locations. A pause. Commander Vosh, we're sorry we couldn't arrive sooner. Every hour counts when civilians are at risk. The transmission ended. Elena stood at her station, staring at the tactical display, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand what these humans were. Marcus touched her shoulder gently. Elena, they're asking permission to send a shuttle. They want you to come aboard their flagship. Elena looked up at him. Why, bomb? They didn't say, but I think Admiral Hawkins wants to meet you in person. The shuttle was unlike anything in Catherine design philosophy, where Catherine vessels curved and flowed following aesthetic principles borrowed from nature. The human shuttle was all sharp angles and flat surfaces. Aggressive geometry that suggested function over form, purpose over beauty. It docked with Station Meridian with the precision of something that had made 10,000 similar dockings. The pilot who emerged was a young female with short dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. She wore a uniform of deep blue with silver insignia that Elena didn't recognize. Commander Vosh, I'm Lieutenant Sarah Reeves. The Admiral is waiting aboard the Harmony, if you'll follow me. The interior of the shuttle was cramped and utilitarian. No windows, no decorative elements. Just crash couches designed for high-gravity maneuvering, and status displays that painted technical readouts in 3 languages, one of which Elena could almost read. The flight to the Harmony took 12 minutes. Elena spent them in silence, her mind replaying the battle. 47 minutes. 180 ships destroyed. Zero human losses, except for the one pilot who had chosen to die protecting strangers. What kind of civilization sent an armada to save people they'd never met? What kind of military force fought with such overwhelming superiority, yet showed restraint enough to let survivors flee? The harmony was enormous up close. 3 kilometers from bow to stern, bristling with weapon systems that had been dormant during the battle. The ship Elena had watched destroy dozens of Vorthan vessels. Unwavering had been fighting with a fraction of its capacity. The implications made her dizzy. The docking bay could have held Station Meridian with room to spare. The shuttle settled onto a landing platform amid dozens of other craft fighters and shuttles and things Elena couldn't identify. Maintenance crews moved with the choreographed efficiency of long practice. Everything clean, everything ordered, everything suggesting an organization that had been doing this for a very long time. Lieutenant Reeves led Elena through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. They passed crew members who moved with the confident stride of professionals, men and women of various ages, but all sharing a certain bearing. Military bearing, the kind that came from training and discipline and experience in situations where mistakes meant death. These were not explorers, not scientists, not merchants. These were warriors who had learned to pretend to be something else. The door to Admiral Hawkins' ready room opened automatically. The space beyond was surprisingly modest. A desk, a small table with chairs, walls covered with screens displaying tactical data and stellar charts. And standing at the viewport, looking out at Catherine Prime, below a man who carried the weight of command like a familiar burden. He turned as Elena entered. Garrett Hawkins was 56 years old. His file would later tell her, but he looked older. Silver threaded his dark hair. Lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. A scar ran along his left jaw, faded but visible. He wore a uniform similar to Lieutenant Reeves' dark blue with silver insignia that marked him as flag rank. His eyes were what Elena noticed most. Tired eyes, old eyes, eyes that had seen things that left marks deeper than scars. Commander Vosh, his voice matched the man, deep and weathered. Thank you for coming. Please sit. Elena sat. Hawkins settled into the chair across from her, moving with the careful precision of someone managing old injuries. Your people fought well, he said. 14 hours holding against overwhelming force. That takes courage. We died well, you mean? Elena hadn't meant for the bitterness to show. 8,000 dead before you arrived. 2,000 more that I deliberately abandoned to save others. We're explorers, Admiral. Scientists. We don't know how to fight wars. But you did anyway. That's what matters. Does it? Elena met his eyes. Your database entry said you were recently spacefaring. Limited military capacity. We expected 5 ships, maybe 10. You brought 137 warships. You destroyed 2 Vorthon fleets in less than an hour with 0 losses. Who are you? What are you? Oh. Hawkins was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested these were words he'd said before in other rooms to other people who'd asked similar questions. We didn't lie, Commander. Your database is accurate. We are recently spacefaring. 203 years since our first faster-than-light flight. That entry was compiled 52 years ago, and at that time we were exactly what it said. Explorers, scientists, merchants, a small defensive fleet. Maybe 40 ships total, mostly scouts and survey vessels. Then what changed? We learned a lesson. Hawkins turned to look out the viewport again. 53 years ago we had a colony. Kepler 442, beautiful world, green valleys, clean air, home to 52,000 people. Farmers mostly, teachers, artists, people who'd left Earth looking for a quiet place to raise their children. Elena waited. She could feel the shape of what was coming. They were attacked by raiders, pirate confederation that had been operating in the outer territories for decades. They sent a distress call, asked for help, asked us to please come save them. Hawkins' hands tightened on the armrest. The government debated, for 8 hours, whether Kepler 442 was strategically important enough to deploy military assets, whether the raiders might negotiate, whether intervention would set a bad precedent. By the time we arrived, he continued, his voice flat, 52,000 people were dead. Every single one. The raiders had been thorough. They killed everyone. Men, women, children, elderly, everyone. Elena felt cold spreading through her chest. I was 23 years old, a junior tactical officer on one of the response ships. I was part of the team that went down to the surface. Hawkins turned back to face her, and his eyes were ancient. I found a girl, 10 years old. She was in what had been a schoolhouse, still sitting at her desk, holding a wooden horse hand-carved, Beautiful craftsmanship. Someone had loved her very much to make something like that. Her name was Rebecca Marsh. I learned that later from the survivor records. She'd wanted to be a veterinarian. She loved animals, drew pictures of them in her notebooks. Hawkins paused. She'd been dead for 6 hours when I found her. Dead because politicians had debated. Because strategic importance had to be assessed. Because 8 hours was too long. The silence in the room was absolute. We swore, Hawkins said quietly, never again. Not one more Rebecca, not one more colony waiting for help that arrived too late. We created Protocol Sentinel. Total mobilization of all military assets when any distress signal is received. No debate, no assessment of strategic value. Someone calls, we come. For 53 years, he continued, we've been building every shipyard, every resource, every advance in technology, all directed toward one purpose, ensuring that when the next distress call came, we would not fail. We would not arrive late. We would bring sufficient force that no one would ever doubt our capacity to protect. Elena understood. You've been preparing for 53 years, for anyone who needed help. For anyone who called. You're not special, Commander. You're just the ones who asked. Hawkins leaned forward. That database entry was right. We were explorers, peaceful, limited military. All of that was true. We just decided to become something else, something that could protect the Rebecca Marshes of the galaxy. 137 ships, Elena said. Is that all you have? No, that's the third fleet. We have 9 fleets total, each one comparable in size and capability. Over 1,200 warships, all built in secret, all hidden behind the mask of peaceful exploration. Hawkins smiled, and it was a sad thing. We let the galaxy think we were harmless, young, naive, because predators don't attack what they fear. They attack what they think is weak. You used us as bait. The words came out before Elena could stop them. No. Hawkins' voice hardened. We came to save you. That you were attacked at all is a failure on our part. We should have made ourselves visible enough that no one would dare. That's on us. But once you called, once Protocol Sentinel activated, nothing in this galaxy or any other would have stopped us from coming. Elena thought about Sector 7, about the 2,400 people she'd deliberately abandoned, about the impossible choice she'd made, knowing that some deaths were necessary to prevent greater deaths. You lost one pilot, she said quietly. Squadron Leader Cross. He shielded our evacuation transport when he could have saved himself. I know. Hawkins' voice was quiet. Brennan was 30 years old, had a wife, a daughter named Autumn, 6 years old. She likes to draw, wants to be an artist when she grows up. He paused. Wanted her father to come home. Why did he do it? Because that's what Guardians do, Commander. We protect, even when it costs everything, especially then. Hawkins stood, walked to the viewport. Brennan knew the stakes, every pilot does. When you volunteer for Sentinel Fleet, you accept that you might die protecting people you never meet. People who don't even know your name. That's the choice. And 40,000 men and women across our 9 fleets have made it. Elena joined him at the viewport. Below she could see Catherine Prime, her world scarred but surviving. Landing craft were descending now, hundreds of them, carrying the Marines who would liberate the occupied zones. What happens now, she asked. Now we finish what we started. My Marines will secure your planet. We'll remove the Vorthan occupation forces. Disarm them. Hold them for war crimes tribunals if your people want justice. Hawkins glanced at her. Then we'll help you rebuild. Send engineers, medical teams, food and supplies, whatever you need. Why, you've already done more than we could have hoped. Why continue? Because protection doesn't end when the shooting stops, Commander. Real guardianship means helping you recover, making sure you're strong enough that this never happens again, teaching you to defend yourselves so next time you don't need us to come save you. Elena looked at this man, this warrior who had built an armada in secret, who had prepared for 53 years to answer a call he didn't know would come, who had lost a pilot today and would go to sleep tonight knowing a 6-year-old girl would grow up without a father. What do you want from us? She asked. Nothing comes free. There must be payment, territorial concessions, resources, technology. What's the price? Hawkins turned to face her fully. Commander Vosh, we're about to have a very important conversation, one that will determine the relationship between our peoples for generations. So I need you to hear me clearly. He gestured to the chairs. They sat. We don't want payment, Hawkins said. We don't want territory. We don't want your resources or your technology or your subservience. We want nothing from you except one thing. Elena waited. When the next distress call comes when some other species faces what you faced, we want you to help answer it. We'll train your people, build your fleet, teach you what we know, and in return, when someone else calls for help, you'll come. As partners, as guardians. The words landed like physical things. That's all. Elena heard the skepticism in her own voice. You'll give us military technology, training, ships, and all you want is for us to help protect others. That's not a small ask, Commander. What I'm offering is the chance to become what we are, to take up the burden we carry. Brennan Cross died today. He won't be the last. If you join us, some of your people will die protecting strangers. People they never meet. People who might not even be grateful. That's the cost of guardianship. And if we refuse, then we'll still help you rebuild. Still make sure you're secure. Still honor our commitment. But you'll do it alone. You'll remain what you are now. Potential victims hoping someone will save you next time trouble comes. Hawkins leaned back. I'm offering you the chance to become saviors instead of victims, to choose protection over helplessness. But it has to be a choice. We don't conscript guardians. Elena thought about Lyra, about her daughter hiding in that evacuation shelter waiting for her mother to save her, about all the daughters and sons on Catherine Prime who had waited while Elena made impossible choices. She thought about Rebecca Marsh, a girl who died because help came 8 hours too late. She thought about Brennan Cross, a man who died making sure that didn't happen to someone else's daughter. What would the training involve? Hawkins smiled. It was the first genuine smile Elena had seen from him. Commander, before we discuss logistics, there's something you need to see. Something that will help you understand what you're considering. He activated a holographic display. The image showed a massive structure in orbit, spherical 30 kilometers in diameter, covered in arrays and emitters that hurt to look at too directly. This is the Helios platform, Hawkins said. One of 7. We built them over the course of 40 years. Each one contains enough weaponry to destabilize a star, to reach into a solar furnace and amplify the fusion reactions until the star goes supernova. Elena stared at the image. You built weapons that can destroy suns. Yes. Why Buffy? Because we wanted to prove we could. Because having the capacity to end worlds means no one will ever doubt whether we can protect them. Because the ultimate deterrent is the one you never have to use. Hawkins met her eyes. We built 7 of these platforms. They've been operational for 12 years. We've never fired one, not once, not even in testing beyond simulations. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Elena did. Real strength isn't the ability to destroy, it's the wisdom to choose not to. Exactly. And he could destroy the Vorthan homeworld, could end their sun and kill 14 billion people in an act of retribution for what they did here. We have that power. We choose not to use it. That's civilization, Commander. That's what separates guardians from conquerors. The hologram shifted, showing new images. Terran Marines landing on Catherine Prime. Combat operations that looked more like rescue missions. Vorthan soldiers being disarmed and taken prisoner, not executed. Medical teams treating wounded on both sides. We're not here for vengeance, Hawkins said. We're here to stop the killing, all of it. Your people, their people, everyone. Violence is sometimes necessary, but it's never the goal. The goal is peace, protection. Ensuring children can grow up in a galaxy where calling for help means someone will answer. Elena watched the operations unfold. Watched human soldiers risk their lives to save Catherine civilians. Watched them treat captured Vorthan troops with professionalism rather than hatred. Admiral, she said quietly, we would be honored to learn from you, to become guardians alongside you, to help answer the next call. Hawkins extended his hand. Elena took it. The grip was firm, warm, carrying the weight of commitment. Welcome to Sentinel Fleet, Commander. We have a lot of work to do. The liberation of Catherine Prime took 6 hours. The Terran Marines moved through the occupied zones with the practiced efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this scenario. They didn't storm in with overwhelming firepower. Instead, they moved surgically isolating Vorthan positions, cutting off communications, offering surrender before engaging. Most of the Vorthan troops surrendered. 40,000 soldiers demoralized by the orbital defeat facing warriors who fought with technology decades ahead of anything they'd encountered, chose to live rather than die for an empire that had abandoned them. 3,000 chose to fight. They died in minutes. Elena watched from the Harmony's command center as Sergeant Cade Rivers led his platoon into Processing Center Alpha, the center where Marcus and Lyra had been held with 4,000 other Catherine civilians. The feeds from the Marines' helmet cameras showed dark corridors, frightened faces. Vorthan guards who realized too late that resistance was futile. Rivers was 36, his service record showed. 15 years in the Marines, veteran of 8 combat operations across 6 star systems. Every engagement, fought to protect, never to conquer. He moved through the facility with his team like they were a single organism, each Marine knowing exactly where the others would be, how the operation would flow. They found Lyra in a holding area with 200 other children. Elena's heart stopped when she saw her daughter on the screen, dirty and scared but alive. So blessedly alive. Rivers knelt down to Lyra's level. Even through the helmet camera, Elena could see the gentleness in the gesture. "Hey there," Rivers said, his voice calm. "Are you Lyra Vosh?" Lyra nodded, eyes wide. "Your mom sent us to get you. Is that okay?" Another nod. "Good. I need you to stay close to me, all right? We're going to get you out of here, get you somewhere safe. Then you can see your mom." Rivers offered his hand. Lyra took it. The image of that small hand in the armored gauntlet made Elena's vision blur with tears she couldn't afford to shed. "Not yet." "Thank you," she whispered. Beside her, Hawkins nodded. "That's what we do." By the time the sun set on Catherine Prime, all 47,000 trapped civilians had been liberated. The processing centers were empty, their machinery of oppression dismantled. The Vorthan occupation was over. The cost: 37 Terran Marines wounded, none killed, 4,200 Catherine civilians injured but alive, and 44 Vorthan soldiers dead because they chose to fight rather than surrender. Elena stood in the Harmony's debriefing room with Hawkins and his senior staff. On the screens around them, medical reports scrolled past, casualty figures, status updates, the administrative aftermath of violence. "Commander Vosh," said a woman Elena hadn't met yet. "Captain Nora Blackwood, commanding officer of the stealth frigate Phantom. We intercepted Vorthane long-range communications during the battle. They sent a distress call of their own to their empire, requesting reinforcements." Elena felt cold. "How many ships? Unknown, but the Vorthon Empire has military assets significantly larger than what we face today. If they decide to retaliate, they could send 500 ships, maybe 1,000. "Can you handle those numbers?" Hawkins answered. "Honestly, yes. We could bring in additional fleets, deploy Helios platforms as deterrent, win any conventional engagement they choose to force. But that's not the point." What is the point? The point is that we don't want to fight a war of extermination with the Vorthan Empire. We want them to learn the same lesson every aggressive species needs to learn: attacking the innocent has consequences, but surrender and reform have rewards. Hawkins gestured to the screens. "Over the next few weeks, we'll be helping the Vorthan Empire understand their new reality, that they exist at our sufferance, that we could end them but choose not to. That cooperation is in their best interest." "You're going to threaten them into peace," Elena said. "We're going to give them a choice. Same one I gave you. Gain us in protecting others, or accept that their days of conquest are over. Either way, they stop attacking innocent people. How they get there is up to them." It was a philosophy that shouldn't work, couldn't work, except Elena had watched it work. Had watched overwhelming force applied with such precision that it left room for mercy. Had watched warriors who could kill without effort choose not to whenever possible. "When do I meet the pilot's family?" Elena asked quietly. "Brennan Cross, his wife and daughter." "His wife requested privacy for now. Grief is complicated." Hawkins paused. "But she asked me to tell you something. She said Brennan made his choice knowing the stakes, that he believed in what we do, that she's proud he died protecting children, even if those children will never know his name. I want them to know." Elena's voice was firm. "Every child on Catherine Prime will learn his name. Brennan Cross will be remembered. I swear it." That would mean a lot to his family. "Thank you." The debriefing continued for another hour, but Elena's mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the choice ahead, about becoming a guardian, about training her people for a role they'd never imagined, about the daughters and sons who would follow in Brennan Cross's footsteps, who would die protecting strangers because that's what guardians do. It was a terrible choice. It was the only choice worth making. When the debriefing ended, Hawkins walked her to the shuttle bay. Lieutenant Reeves was waiting to take Elena back to Station Meridian, back to her command, back to the work of rebuilding a world. "Commander," Hawkins said as they stood at the shuttle ramp, "you asked me earlier what kind of civilization sends an armada to save strangers. I want you to understand something. We didn't become this way because we're better than other species. We became this way because we failed. Because 53 years ago, we let Rebecca Marsh die. We carry that failure every day. Let it reshape us. Let it drive us to become something that would never fail like that again. You're saying you're driven by guilt. I'm saying we're driven by responsibility. We have the power to protect. That means we must protect. Not because it benefits us, because it's right. Because in a galaxy that can be cruel and dark, someone needs to stand up and say this far, no further. You don't get to hurt the innocent while we draw breath. Elena extended her hand again. Hawkins shook it. Admiral, I have one more question. Go ahead. Protocol Sentinel, when a distress call comes in, how long does it take for the fleet to mobilize? Hawkins smiled, and for the first time, Elena saw pride in it. From signal receipt to first ships launching, 47 minutes. That's our standard. We never want to be 8 hours late ever again. 47 minutes. The same amount of time it had taken them to destroy 2 Vorthan fleets. It wasn't coincidence. It was doctrine. It was the heartbeat of an organization that had built itself around one simple principle: when someone calls you, answer. Immediately. Elena boarded the shuttle. As it pulled away from the Harmony, she looked back at the massive warship, at the fleet arrayed in perfect formation around Catherine Prime, at the Guardians who had come when she called. She thought about Lyra Safe now, who would grow up in a world that knew what it meant to be protected, who would have the chance to learn to protect others in turn. She thought about Brennan Cross and the choice he'd made. She thought about the choice she would make, had already made. When the next distress call came, Catherine would answer. 3 months after the liberation of Catherine Prime, Elena Vosh stood in a room she had never expected to enter. The Terran Alliance Council chamber aboard Station Unity, a massive structure the humans had constructed in orbit around a neutral moon at the edge of explored space. The chamber was designed for gatherings like this, historic moments when species came together not through conquest or commerce, but through shared purpose. 17 civilizations had sent representatives, 17 species who had watched the Battle of Catherine Prime and understood that the galaxy had changed in those 47 minutes. That humanity had revealed itself not as the young explorers everyone assumed, but as something far older in spirit, if not in years. Guardians, protectors, warriors who had chosen restraint as their ultimate weapon. Elena wore the uniform Admiral Hawkins had given her, deep blue with silver insignia, marking her as a commander in the newly formed Catherine Defense Fleet. The fleet that didn't exist yet, except on paper, and in the determination of a people who had learned that peace required strength to sustain it. Beside her stood Marcus Thorne, recovered from his injuries, his grief for his son Damien now channeled into purpose. He wore civilian clothes but carried himself with new dignity. The dignity of someone who had activated a beacon in desperation and changed the course of galactic history. The chamber filled slowly. Representatives from species Elena had never met. The Altarian Confederacy, who had refused Catherine's distress call, now looking uncomfortable in their ornate diplomatic robes. The Nexus Trade Alliance, their calculating eyes assessing the commercial implications of this new order. The Dianxi Republic, a confederation of mining worlds that had been terrorized by pirates for decades. The Valorian collective artists and philosophers who had never developed military technology and lived in constant fear of those who had. And dozens more. Small civilizations. Peaceful peoples. Species who had survived by being insignificant enough that predators looked elsewhere, all of them watching the humans with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. At the center of the chamber, Admiral Garrett Hawkins stood with his senior staff. Captain Roland Steele, who had commanded the dreadnought Invictus during the battle. Captain Nora Blackwood, whose stealth frigate had assassinated the Vorthan flagship. And at Hawkins's right hand, a man Elena hadn't met before, Ambassador Nathaniel Callahan. 63 years old, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in diplomatic service. Callahan stepped to the central podium. His voice, when he spoke, carried without amplification. The acoustics were perfect, intentional. Honored representatives, Callahan began. 3 months ago, a species we had never met sent a distress call into the darkness. They were facing genocide, extinction. The systematic destruction of everything their people had built over 3 centuries of peaceful exploration and scientific advancement. His words echoed in the vast space. 16 of you received that same distress call. 16 of you chose not to respond. Your reasons were your own. Border conflicts, commercial considerations, strategic calculations, the mathematics of self-interest that have governed galactic relations for millennia. Elena watched the Altarian representatives shift uncomfortably. The Nexus delegation stared straight ahead, faces carefully neutral. Humanity responded, Callahan continued, not because Catherine Prime offered us anything, not because they could repay us, not because saving them served our strategic interests. We responded because they called, Because when innocent people face death, someone must answer. That is the principle upon which we built Protocol Sentinel 53 years ago. He paused, letting the silence stretch. For half a century we have prepared, built fleets in secret, developed the weapons you cannot imagine, trained generations of soldiers for a war we hoped would never come but knew eventually would. We let you believe we were young, inexperienced, limited in capacity. We let you underestimate us because predators don't attack what they fear. They attack what appears weak. But that deception ends today. Callahan gestured and holographic displays materialized around the chamber. Images of the 9 Terran fleets, over 1,200 warships. The Helios platforms, 7 star killers arrayed across human space. Manufacturing capacity that dwarfed most civilizations' entire industrial output. A military force that could, if it chose, dominate this entire region of the galaxy. This is what we are, Callahan said quietly. This is what we have built while you watched and dismissed us. We have the capacity to end civilizations, to crack planets, to extinguish suns. We possess weapons of such magnitude that using them would make us the monsters we claim to oppose. The chamber was absolutely silent now, and we choose not to use them. Callahan's voice hardened. For 300 years, the species in this chamber have operated under a comfortable lie that peace could be maintained through treaties and trade agreements. That Article 12 of the Coalition Charter promising mutual defense meant something. Catherine Prime called for that mutual defense. You voted. 22 abstentions, 3 opposed, 1 in favor. Then Article 12 failed because you were comfortable, because helping strangers carried costs you weren't willing to pay. He let that hang in the air like an accusation. We built weapons capable of genocide and then proved our civilization by never firing them. We fought a battle where we could have killed hundreds of thousands and instead took 1 casualty because one of our pilots chose to shield a civilian transport. We had every right to vengeance against the Vorthon Empire for what they did to Catherine Prime. We had the power to enact that vengeance. We chose mercy instead. Callahan's voice dropped, became something quieter but no less intense. There is an old human phrase, si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. For 53 years, we have prepared for war so thoroughly that peace became inevitable for anyone wise enough to see what we had become. But preparation without principle is just armed tyranny. Power without restraint is just another form of conquest. He gestured to Elena. Commander Vosh, would you join me, please? Elena walked to the podium, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She had rehearsed this moment with Callahan, but the reality was still overwhelming. All these representatives, all these species, all watching her. Commander Vosh, Callahan said formally, on behalf of the Terran Defense Initiative and the people of humanity, I present the offer of formal alliance between our peoples. An alliance predicated not on commercial gain or territorial expansion, but on shared principles. The protection of innocent life. The opposition to aggressive expansion. The commitment to answer distress calls from any species anywhere, regardless of their capacity to repay us. He turned to face her directly. We offer to train your people, to help you build a defensive fleet, to share our technology and tactical knowledge. In return, we ask only that when the next distress call comes, you answer it with us. As partners, as guardians. Do you accept these terms? Elena had thought about this moment for 3 months, had discussed it with the reformed Catherine Council, had lain awake nights wondering if she was leading her people into something they weren't ready for. If the price of becoming guardians was too high for a species that had known only peace, then she thought about Lyra, about her daughter who was alive because Brennan Cross had chosen to die protecting her, about the debt that could never be repaid, only honored. On behalf of the Catherine Republic, Elena said, her voice steady, we accept. We will learn from you. We will train with you. And when others call for help, we will answer. Callahan extended his hand. Elena took it. The holographic recorders captured the moment, the image that would be broadcast across 100 worlds. The first formal alliance of the Terran Protectorate. Welcome, Commander. Welcome to all Catherine people. You are no longer victims waiting for rescue. You are guardians learning to protect others. The chamber erupted. Not in applause, there was too much tension for that, but in a cascade of diplomatic responses. Other representatives requesting to speak. Delegations conferring urgently among themselves. Ambassador Torin of the Dianxi Republic was the first to approach the podium. She was small even by her species' standards, her skin the blue-gray of her mining world, her eyes large and dark with the adaptation of people who spent generations underground. Ambassador Callahan, Torin said, her voice barely above a whisper. My people have been terrorized by pirate confederations for 30 years. Our ships are destroyed, our colonies looted. We have sent distress calls to the coalition repeatedly. No one has ever come. Will you answer if we call? Callahan's expression softened. Ambassador Torrin, if you request alliance under the terms I've outlined, then attacks on your people become attacks on all of us. We will come. We will train your people to defend themselves. We will help you build the capacity to protect your own worlds, but you must be willing to do the same for others when their turn comes. We are miners, not warriors. The Catherine were scientists, not warriors. Now they're learning. The question isn't what you are now, it's what you choose to become. Torn was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, we choose to become guardians. The next 3 hours were a cascade of similar moments. Species after species approaching the podium. Some requesting alliance immediately, others asking questions about obligations, about costs, about what happened if they couldn't or wouldn't fight when called upon. Hawkins answered those questions with the patient precision of someone who had anticipated every concern. If you join and cannot fight, you contribute in other ways. Medical support, engineering, supply chains, guardianship takes many forms, but you must contribute something. This isn't a protection racket where we defend you in exchange for nothing. That's vassalage. We're offering partnership. By the time the session ended, 7 species had formally requested alliance. 7 civilizations committing to the principles of mutual protection and shared burden. The Dianxi Republic, the Valorian Collective, 3 others Elena had never heard of, and Catherine I, the ones who had called when no one else would answer. Elena found Hawkins afterward in a quiet observation room overlooking the chamber. He stood at the viewport watching the diplomatic vessels depart, his expression unreadable. 7, Elena said, joining him. Is that more or fewer than you expected? About right. Change is frightening. What we're offering requires these civilizations to fundamentally alter how they see themselves. From potential victims to active protectors. That's not a small psychological shift. The Altarians didn't request alliance. Neither did Nexus. No, they're too comfortable, too invested in the current system. It will take more than one demonstration to convince them. Hawkins turned to face her. But 7 is enough to start. 7 species committed to answering the next distress call. 7 civilizations learning to be guardians. That's a foundation we can build on. Elena looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, someone else was probably facing what Catherine had faced. Someone else was desperate, frightened, watching their world burn. How long until we're ready, she asked. How long until Catherine has a fleet that can actually help? You'll receive your first 3 ships in 6 months. Training vessels, older Terran designs that we've upgraded. Your people will train on those while we build the next generation. Full operational capability. 3 years, maybe 4. No, 3 years. That's a long time for people who need help now. It is. That's why we maintain our 9 fleets. We cover the gap until our partners are ready. Then we cover it together. Hawkins paused. Elena, there's something you need to understand. Something about the cost of what we do. Brennan Cross. More than that, Cross was killed in action. Quick, clean. He died doing what he trained for. But guardianship exacts other prices. Psychological ones. Moral ones. You'll ask your people to fight for strangers. Some of them will die. Some will come home changed, haunted by what they've seen and done. Some will question whether it's worth it. Whether protecting people they never meet justifies the cost. Elena thought about the choice she'd made in Sector 7, the 2,400 people she'd deliberately abandoned. I already know about impossible choices, Admiral. You know about one impossible choice made in extremity. Command will require you to make those choices routinely, to send people into danger, to accept casualties as the price of success, to live with the names of the dead while the living move on and forget. Hawkins's voice was quiet. That's the real burden of guardianship. Not the fighting, the living with what the fighting costs. How do you do it? I remember Rebecca Marsh, the girl who died because we arrived 8 hours late. I remember that every decision I make, every order I give, every ship I deploy, it's all in service of making sure there's never another Rebecca. That helps, most days. They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars, 2 people who had been forced to become something they never expected. Commander and guardian, student and teacher. Admiral, Elena said finally, thank you for coming when we called, for not being 8 hours late. Thank you for calling, Hawkins replied, for giving us the chance to do what we've prepared 53 years to do, for letting us be guardians instead of just soldiers waiting for a war. 1 year after the liberation, Catherine Prime held his first memorial ceremony. The wall that Elena had stood before in her memories was now real polished obsidian, stretching across the plaza that had been rebuilt on the ruins of what the Vorthons had destroyed. 8,400 names. Every Catherine who had died in those terrible 3 days. And at the bottom, separate but honored, one human name. Commander Brennan Cross, Terran Defense Initiative. Died protecting those he never met. The ceremony drew thousands, Catherine families who had lost people, survivors from the processing centers, children who had been rescued by Terran Marines, and 3 humans who had traveled across space to attend: Admiral Hawkins, Sergeant Cade Rivers, who had led the liberation of Processing Center Alpha, and Mira Cross, widow of Brennan, with their daughter Autumn, now 7 years old. Elena had dreaded this meeting. What do you say to someone whose husband died saving your people? How do you express gratitude that feels simultaneously infinite and insufficient? Mira Cross was 29 years old, tall and lean, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. She wore her husband's service medals on a chain around her neck. Autumn held her mother's hand, a serious child with her father's eyes. They met in a private room before the ceremony. Elena had prepared words, speeches, formal expressions of gratitude that felt hollow even as she rehearsed them. She abandoned all of that when she saw Autumn's face. "Thank you," Elena said simply. "Your husband saved my daughter, saved thousands of our children. I can never repay that." But Mira's smile was sad but genuine. Commander Vosh Brennan knew what he was doing. He volunteered for Sentinel Fleet, trained for 8 years for moments exactly like that. He believed in what humanity was building, believed that protecting innocent life was worth any price. That doesn't make it hurt less. No, it doesn't. Mira touched the medals at her throat. But it means something. He died as he lived, protecting people. That's not a small thing. Autumn tugged at her mother's hand. "Mom, can I say something?" "Of course, sweetheart." The girl looked up at Elena with eyes far too old for 7 years. "My dad talked about you, about the Catherine. He said you were brave, that you fought even when you were scared, that you called for help even when you didn't know if anyone would answer." Elena knelt down to Autumn's level. "Your father was braver. He came when we called. He protected my daughter Lyra when he could have saved himself." "He would have wanted that," Autumn said seriously. "Dad always said the bravest thing is choosing to help when you don't have to, when you could stay safe. But you come anyway." Elena felt tears threatening. This child who would grow up without a father was trying to comfort her. "Would you like to meet Lyra?" Elena asked. "She's here. She's 9 now. She draws pictures of your father, wants to make sure everyone remembers him." Autumn brightened. "Really? Can I see them?" The memorial ceremony began an hour later. Thousands gathered in the plaza as the twin suns set, casting long shadows across the obsidian wall. Elena stood at the podium, looking out at faces she had known her entire life, people who had survived because of choices made by strangers. 1 year ago, Elena began her voice carrying across the plaza. "We faced extinction. Our defenses were failing. Our people were being processed for slavery and extermination. We had tried diplomacy, tried appeals to treaties and mutual defense agreements. We had been denied, abandoned, left to die alone." The crowd was absolutely silent. "We sent a desperate message into the dark, a prayer to anyone who might hear. We expected nothing. We received everything." Elena gestured to where Hawkins stood with his officers and Mira Cross. Humanity came, not with 5 ships, not with 10. They came with 137 warships. They came prepared for total war. They came with weapons that could have turned this world into ash. And they came with something more important than weapons. They came with the principle that innocent life must be protected, that when someone calls for help, you answer. Not because it benefits you, because it's right. She looked down at the memorial wall, at the names carved in stone. 8,400 of our people died before help arrived. Each name on this wall represents a life cut short, a future stolen, dreams that will never be realized. We remember them, we honor them. We promise that their deaths will not be meaningless. Elena's voice strengthened. But one name on this wall is different. Commander Brennan Cross died protecting our children. A stranger from a species we barely knew. He had a choice. He could have evaded the attack that killed him, could have saved himself. He chose to shield a transport carrying 300 children instead. Chose to die so others could live. She turned to face Mira and Autumn. His wife is here today, his daughter. They came across the stars to stand with us, to let us see the face of the man who saved us, to let us understand the cost of guardianship. Elena gestured for them to join her at the podium. Mira walked forward with quiet dignity, Autumn beside her. Mira Cross, Elena said. On behalf of every person on Catherine Prime, on behalf of the 300 children your husband saved, including my daughter Lyra, on behalf of a species that learned what it means to be protected, we offer you our eternal gratitude. Your husband's name will be taught in every school. His sacrifice will be remembered by every generation. He will never be forgotten. Mira's voice was soft but steady. Brennan believed that protecting the innocent was the highest calling. He believed that a civilization is measured not by its weapons, but by what it chooses to do with them. He would be honored to know he's remembered this way. He's more than remembered, Elena said. He's inspired. The first ship in the Catherine Defense Fleet, when it launches 6 months from now, will be named in his honor. The CDS Brennan's shield will carry his legacy, will answer distress calls the way humanity answered ours. The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in a sound that was uniquely Catherine, a harmonic hum that built and resonated the sound their species made to honor the dead and celebrate the living. It washed over the plaza like a wave, and Elena saw Mira's composure finally crack, tears streaming down her face as she understood that her husband would live on in more than memory. After the ceremony, Elena found Lyra with Autumn, the two girls sitting by the memorial wall. Lyra was showing Autumn her drawings, pictures of a fighter craft shielding a transport, of a pilot who had become a hero. Mom, Lyra called when she saw Elena. Autumn's dad saved me. She said he would have wanted me to be safe. He did, sweetheart. He absolutely did. Autumn looked up at Elena with those old eyes. Will you teach us? When we're older, will you teach us to be guardians like my dad? Elena glanced at Mira, saw the fear there, the knowledge that her daughter was already planning to follow in her father's footsteps. If that's what you choose, Elena said carefully, when you're old enough to understand the cost, when you can make that choice with open eyes, then yes, we'll teach you. I already understand, Autumn said. The cost is sometimes you die protecting people. But the cost of not protecting them is they die, and nobody cares. Dad said caring was the whole point. Elena knelt beside both girls. Your father was right. Caring is the whole point. Everything else, all the ships and weapons and training, it's just tools. The caring is what makes us guardians instead of just soldiers. 10 years after the liberation, Elena stood on the bridge of the CDS Brennan's shield, watching her world recede in the viewport. The ship was a masterpiece of combined Catherine and Terran engineering, incorporating the best of both civilizations' technology. Not as large as the Terran capital ships, but formidable in its own right, a symbol of what Catherine had become. Her crew was young, veterans of the training programs that had transformed Catherine from a species of scientists and explorers into something more. Guardian candidates who had chosen to learn the tools of violence in service of peace, including her daughter. Lyra Vosh was 18 now, serving as a junior tactical officer. She had graduated from the Joint Terran-Catherine Academy with honors, had chosen this path despite Elena's attempts to show her easier roads, safer roads. All stations report ready, Lyra said from her console. We're cleared for departure. Elena settled into the command chair. Her command chair. After 10 years of training, of learning from Terran instructors, of absorbing the principles and practices of guardianship, Catherine had its fleet. 12 ships. Not enough to defend against a major invasion, but enough to answer distress calls. Enough to help. Take us out, Lieutenant Vosh, Elena said formally. Standard departure trajectory. The Brennan shield, along with 3 companion vessels, accelerated away from Catherine Prime. They were joining a Terran task force for patrol duty in the border regions, areas where pirate activity was common and distress calls frequent. Marcus's voice came over the communication system from his position on the surface. He taught at the Naval Academy, now 68 years old, training the next generation of Catherine officers in the principles of guardian warfare. Elena, he said, safe journey. Bring them home. We will, Marcus. Brennan's shield out. The journey to the rendezvous point took 3 days. During that time, Elena drilled her crew relentlessly. Combat simulations, damage control exercises, rescue operations, everything they might face when a distress call came. Because it would come. That was the one certainty. Somewhere in the vast darkness, someone would call for help. And now Catherine would be there to answer. They met the Terran task force in a binary star system, 18 ships under the command of Captain Iris Monroe. The youngest flag officer in Sentinel Fleet at 39, she had a reputation for aggressive tactics tempered by genuine care for civilian populations. Commander Vosh, Monroe said via holographic transmission. Welcome to Task Force 7. We're honored to have the Brennan Shield with us. How's your crew? Ready, Captain, eager to prove themselves. They'll get their chance. This region has active pirate confederations and 2 low-level territorial disputes. We run patrols, respond to distress calls, and occasionally have to convince aggressive parties that they really don't want to fight us. Over the next 6 months, Elena learned what guardianship meant in practice. It meant long patrols through empty space. It meant responding to calls that turned out to be false alarms or misunderstandings. It meant the tedium of vigilance broken by moments of intense action. They answered their first real distress call 4 months into the patrol. A mining colony on a barren moon attacked by pirates seeking their refined ore. 2,300 civilians under siege. Local defenses overwhelmed. The colony had perhaps 6 hours before the pirates breached their last shelters. Task Force 7 responded in 42 minutes. Elena watched from the Brennan Shield as Captain Monroe's task force moved with the precision she'd come to associate with Terran operations. 3 ships to deal with the pirate fleet. 3 more to provide orbital support. The Catherine vessels assigned to evacuation support and medical assistance. The pirates fled the moment they detected the task force, smart enough to know they were hopelessly outmatched. Monroe let them go, focusing instead on securing the colony and treating the wounded. Elena took a shuttle down to the surface with her medical team. The colony was devastated, buildings collapsed, people injured and terrified, but alive. They would survive because someone had answered their call. A young woman approached Elena as her team worked, covered in dust, bleeding from a head wound, but standing straight. "You came," she said simply. "We called and you came." "Of course we came," Elena replied. "That's what guardians do." The woman started crying, not from pain, Elena realized, but from relief, from the overwhelming weight of fear suddenly lifted. Elena held her while she wept, this stranger she had never met, and understood completely what Hawkins had tried to teach her. This was the point, not the ships or the weapons or the strategic victories. This moment, this person, alive because someone cared enough to come. More calls followed. Some they reached in time, some they didn't. Each one was a lesson. Each one carved its mark on Elena's crew, on Lyra, on everyone who wore the Guardian's burden. The worst was a colony transport that had been attacked between systems. By the time Task Force 7 arrived, all 2,000 people aboard were dead. Pirates had killed them when they realized the Guardian fleet was coming, eliminating witnesses rather than risk capture. Elena stood on the bridge of the Brennan Shield, looking at the drifting hulk of that transport, and felt something inside her harden. This was the count, not just the people you saved, but the ones you couldn't save. The ones who died because evil existed, and sometimes evil acted faster than Guardians could respond. "Commander," Lyra said quietly, "long-range sensors are tracking the pirate vessels. They're 6 hours ahead, but we could catch them." Elena thought about pursuit, about vengeance, about making the pirates pay for what they'd done. "No," she said finally. "We document this. We send the evidence to Terran intelligence. They'll hunt these pirates properly with sufficient force to capture them for trial. Our mission is protection, not vengeance." "They killed 2,000 people, Mom." "I know, and they'll answer for that. But we don't abandon our mission to chase them. Someone else might need help. Someone else might be calling right now." It was the hardest decision she'd made since Sector 7, to let the pirates go, to trust in the system, to remain guardians rather than become executioners. Lyra was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, "You're right, I hate it, but you're right. Guardianship isn't about what we hate or what we want," Elena said. "It's about what we must do, what we've committed to do. Protection, not punishment." That night, alone in her quarters, Elena allowed herself to grieve. For the 2,000 who had died, for the choice she'd made, for the weight of command that never seemed to get lighter no matter how long she carried it. She thought about Hawkins, about his 53 years of carrying that weight, about Rebecca Marsh and all the people who had died because help came too late or not at all. She thought about Brennan Cross, who had died making sure help arrived. And she understood finally completely what it meant to be a guardian. Not just the heroic moments or the dramatic rescues, but the grinding, endless commitment to show up, to answer, to care when caring was hard and costly and guaranteed to break your heart. 10 years after liberation, 6 months into active patrol, 23 distress calls answered, 19 successful rescues, 4 failures that would haunt her forever. This was guardianship. This was the choice she had made. 20 years after the liberation of Catherine Prime, Elena Vosh retired from active command. She was 63 years old, her body marked by decades of service, her mind carrying memories of battles fought and lives saved and losses that never stopped hurting. She took a position at the Taryn Catherine Naval Academy, teaching the next generation of officers. Not tactics or strategy, those were covered by younger instructors. Elena taught what she called guardian philosophy, the principles that made the difference between being soldiers and being protectors. Her students were young, eager, full of idealism and determination. They reminded her of herself 2 decades ago, standing in that council chamber, accepting alliance thinking she understood what it meant to be a guardian. The question you have to answer, Elena told her class of 47 cadets, is not whether you can fight. The military will teach you to fight. The technology will give you the tools to win battles. The question is whether you can care. Whether you can maintain empathy across light years and language barriers and cultural differences that make communication difficult. She walked between the rows of students, Catherine and humans and Dianxi and 7 other species now part of the Alliance. 31 civilizations now. 31 species committed to answering the calls. Guardian warfare is not about defeating enemies, Elena continued. It's about protecting innocence. Sometimes those are the same thing. Sometimes they're not. You have to know the difference. A young Catherine officer raised her hand, Cadet Vera Nix, top of her tactical class. Commander, what about when protection requires killing? When the only way to save the innocent is to destroy the threat? Then you destroy the threat, Elena said simply, but you do it with precision, with restraint. You don't kill more than necessary. You don't allow anger or hatred to guide your actions. You remain professional, clinical. You kill because you must not, because you want to. How do you live with that? Elena was quiet for a moment. You remember the ones you saved. You honor the ones you lost. You accept that the burden of guardianship is carrying both weights for the rest of your life. And you do it anyway because the alternative is letting innocent people die when you could have stopped it. She thought about Sector 7, about the 2,400 people she deliberately abandoned 20 years ago, about choices that never stopped cutting no matter how much time passed. Some of you won't make it, Elena said bluntly. Not because you'll die, though some might, but because the weight will break you. Because caring for strangers across decades wears down even the strongest people. There's no shame in recognizing you can't carry that burden. Better to step aside than to break while in command. But for those of you who can carry it, who choose to carry it, you'll be part of something that matters. You'll answer calls from the desperate. You'll arrive when no one else will come. You'll be the reason someone's child grows up safe. That's not a small thing. After the class, Elena walked the academy grounds. The facility had been built jointly by humans and Catherine architecture, blending both species' aesthetics. Gardens where students could reflect. Training facilities where they could practice. Memorials where they could remember. She stopped at one particular memorial, a statue of a fighter pilot standing at attention looking toward the stars. At the base, a simple inscription, Commander Brennan Cross, Guardian. He came when called. Elena stood before the statue for a long moment, as she did every day, paying respects to the man who had saved her daughter, who had given Catherine the chance to become guardians themselves. Commander Vosh, Elena turned. Admiral Garrett Hawkins stood behind her, older now, at 77, his hair completely silver, walking with a cane to support a leg injured in some long-ago campaign. But his eyes were the same, tired, ancient, carrying the weight of decades. Admiral, Elena said warmly, I didn't know you were visiting. Came to give a lecture on Protocol Sentinel's history. Thought I'd stop by Cross's memorial. Do that whenever I'm on Catherine. Hawkins joined her before the statue. How are your students? Eager, idealistic. They think they understand what they're signing up for. Did we? Elena smiled. No, but we learned. They stood in companionable silence, 2 guardians who had fought side by side, teacher and student, now colleagues in the eternal work of protection. 43 conflicts resolved since we formed the alliance, Hawkins said. Minimal casualties in most. Former enemies joining as partners. The Vorthon Empire sent a delegation last month requesting observer status. They want to learn our methods. The ones who tried to exterminate us want to become guardians. People change. Civilizations change. We were tyrants once, Elena. Conquerors. We chose to become something else. Why can't they? Because I remember what they did. The processing centers. The 2,400 I abandoned. And they'll remember that we spared them when we could have destroyed them. That we helped them rebuild. That we offered partnership instead of punishment. Hawkins turned to face her. Guardianship means protecting even people who don't deserve it. even people who hurt us. That's the hardest part. Elena knew he was right, hated that he was right, but that was guardianship, protecting everyone, even the ones who had been enemies. Have you heard from Mira Cross? Elena asked, changing the subject. She remarried 3 years ago. Good man, teacher. Autumn graduated from the academy last year. Assigned to the 5th Fleet, already distinguished herself in 2 operations, following in her father's footsteps. Isn't that what we all do? Follow the guardians who came before us. The Academy's alert system chimed, a distress call. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was calling for help. Elena and Hawkins watched as the base erupted into controlled chaos. Ships powering up, crews rushing to stations. Instructors calling cadets to observation posts where they could watch how a response was coordinated. 47 minutes. That was still the standard. From signal receipt to first ships launching. A promise kept across more than 70 years now. Do you ever wonder, Elena asked quietly, if we're making a difference? If all this, all the training and preparation and sacrifice, if it actually matters? Hawkins smiled. I stopped wondering the day we saved Catherine Prime. Every person who grows up safe because we answered their call, that's the difference. Every species that joins the Alliance and learns to protect others, that's the difference. Every student in your class who becomes a guardian, that's the difference. Rebecca Marsh still haunts you. Every day. But so do the thousands who didn't die because we learned from her. Because we chose to become guardians instead of remaining failures. Both can be true, Elena. The grief and the purpose. They watched the ships launch, 12 vessels from the Academy joining the response fleet. Among them, Elena could see the newest Catherine ship, the CDS Lyra's Hope, commanded by her daughter. 38 years old now. A captain, a guardian in her own right. Elena thought about the girl she'd been hiding in that evacuation shelter, waiting for her mother to save her. Now she was the one doing the saving. That was legacy. That was what it meant to be a guardian. Not just protecting people yourself, but teaching others to protect. Creating a cycle that would continue long after you were gone. They're responding to a call from the Sigma Draconis system, Hawkins said, checking his data pad. Reports of pirate activity, 3 inhabited moons at risk, 40,000 civilians. The same number that had been on Catherine Prime. The same stakes, but this time help was coming in 47 minutes. This time those civilians wouldn't die, waiting for politicians to debate strategic importance. Lyra will handle it well, Elena said. She's ready. She learned from the best. They stood together watching the ships disappear into faster-than-light travel carrying guardians to answer a call. The work continuing, the mission ongoing, the promise kept. Elena thought about the beacon Marcus had activated 20 years ago, about the desperate prayers sent into darkness, about expecting nothing and receiving from everything. She thought about the choice she'd made that day in the Alliance Council chamber. To learn, to train, to become a guardian herself. She thought about Brennan Cross, whose sacrifice had given her people the chance to become protectors instead of victims. And she thought about the future, about all the students she would teach, about all the calls they would answer, about the cycle of guardianship continuing across generations and species and time. Somewhere in the darkness, someone would call for help, and someone would answer. That was civilization. That was choice. That was what separated light from darkness, guardians from tyrants, hope from despair. Not the weapons, not the ships, not the technology. The choice to care when caring was hard. The choice to answer when answering was costly. The choice to protect when protection might mean death. That simple choice, made and remade every day by thousands of guardians across dozens of species, was what held the darkness at bay. Elena Vosh, retired commander of the Catherine Defense Fleet, teacher of Guardian philosophy, survivor of Sector 7, stood with Admiral Garrett Hawkins and watched the stars. And somewhere in those stars help was arriving, right on time.